All right. It is top of the hour. Shall we get going?
Yes, let's get going. Chris is going to be presenting, and I'm going to be here for entertainment purposes today. This is another episode of Baseline Tech Talk Tuesday. And I think we got mostly familiar faces, but if you're joining us on a replay, potentially on YouTube, please take a minute and watch any of our previous episodes that might be interesting for you. And keep in mind that we have a lot of how-to content on the YouTube channel. Dan Conger, our training manager, is always making new content on how to install our products, how to program Baseline products, how to service and troubleshoot Baseline products. So if you are in need of technical support, check out the YouTube channel, and there's a pretty good chance you can find your answer there.
Absolutely.
So, just Chris and I today. Chris Wright is VP of Sales. I'm Andy Humphrey, Irrigation Technology Consultant, and we are going to be having a conversation about sports turf management and how to utilize Baseline's engineered solutions for sports turf management purposes.
Absolutely. And it aligns with, some of the focus that HydroPoint has as a whole this month, promoting, better irrigation practices and technology on sports turf applications. So I think we've got some cool things to talk about today. So I think last week, Dan Conger and Greg Godot focused on the coaches button and its applicability in working on sports turf applications. We're going to go a little bit deeper dive today and continue the conversation and talk about different ways that, the Baseline technology applies to sports turf management. So to begin with, emphasize the fact that Baseline provides engineered irrigation solutions to market, utilizing our proprietary 2-wire technology and real-time sensor data to enhance system performance. And once again, it's perfectly relevant. It comes into play when we're talking about sports turf management, right?
Yep.
And when we talk about sports turf, we spoke about this earlier, Andy, it's not, typically or always a professionally maintained or professional sports complex. We want to make this relevant for those professional installations, but also all the way down to, the school level, high school sports turf, or even, the sports turf that may be behind, as you said, the local church in the neighborhood, right? That gets used for soccer tournaments or baseball or whatever it may be. So things we're going to talk about, it's relevant for all types of sports.
Yes.
Turf.
Yes. And some sports turf have eyeballs on the field 8 hours a day. Other types of maintained sports facilities have eyeballs like once a month, right? So that there is this spectrum of how closely does a human have input, and there are some situations where they never do. So sports turf is a large category.
Very broad for sure. So when preparing for the episode, I looked online to see what kind of information was available specifically to irrigating sports turf. Happened to come across this article from Sports Field Management magazine online, where they interviewed Michael Temple from the IA and spoke specifically to smart irrigation for sports fields, right? So how does Baseline fit into that? And some of the points that he made that are really relevant and which we align with are the facts that weather-based controllers, soil moisture sensors, and flow meters are really the components that are critical to contributing to technology in a sports field application. And using that information not only for the data collected, but also in helping to automate the irrigation schedule so that you are maintaining the aesthetic value of the sports turf, but also taking into consideration the use of it and the playability of it for when it is played on.
Yeah, I think playability is important to remember. because we are watering the crop, i.e. the grass, to maintain health of grass. But then oftentimes, and I think we'll talk about it here shortly, there's watering for playability, which sometimes does not mean for the health of the grass. It's watering for the play of the ball, the play of the sport, and other aspects like that.
Yep, absolutely, right. And so the irrigation's performance can really have an impact on the schedule itself, right? You have to audit the sports turf and see what the distribution uniformity is of the sprinkler type that's irrigating it, and then also take into consideration the moisture transport through the soil profile that will also help to enhance that distribution uniformity in the soil, and that moisture content, which contributes to that playability in a big way, right? So if we were to relate it specifically to Baseline's technology and collecting data that's relevant from that sports turf, once again, it goes back to our soil moisture sensor technology, right? And using the data from that moisture sensor to help us automate our watering strategy, either based on run time or the frequency or watering cycle of irrigation to maintain the plant material, but also to achieve those playability objectives.
Yes.
Right? So common theme through many different episodes that we have, where that soil moisture sensor technology is really the baseline technology, no pun intended, in helping us manage landscapes of different types.
Yeah, and it's a good reminder too that this can be completely automated, or it can be a tool for the user to make their own decisions, and both are equally important. You know, a field that doesn't have eyeballs on it except for once a week, perhaps automation is more valuable, and a field that has someone on it every day making real-time decisions on their own, it might be just better to have a data collection tool to help them make better decisions with.
Right. Yep. Being able to see in real time that moisture content will help you determine, you know, when to turn on, or manually or automatically, and then how long to water in order to get to that level of moisture content that you need or want. Very good. So when we start diving into analyzing sports turf, you got to really know what you're dealing with the plant material, the root depth, the soil type, the compaction of that field or playing surface, and then the location, meaning where the stress areas are on that playing surface, i.e. right in front of the goal on a soccer pitch, or at the 50-yard line or 25-yard line, whatever, on a football field. Wherever those higher stress areas are going to have different management objectives in order to maintain the playability of that field. Right. And then knowing the root depth and soil type, etc., will help you understand how to irrigate it better so that you are optimizing the performance of that field.
Yeah. And some of those, like root depth, that could, depending on the root depth that you are trying to achieve, it could influence perhaps how deep you like to bury the sensor, because the sensor doesn't care where it's buried. It's just going to report accurate moisture over time very repeatably. And so as the sports turf manager or water manager or irrigation professional or turf professional, you can decide at what depth do I want to measure the moisture? At what depth is that an important factor in my agronomics?
Yeah. And, one of the biggest concerns of using moisture sensors on a sports turf application is, those fields are often aerated, right? And they're concerned about damaging either the wire or the sensor itself that is in the playing surface. But determining how deep you bury that in order to stay out of harm's way for aeration, but interpreting the data that you're getting from it, whether it's in the top 1/3 of the root zone of that plant material or not, being able to analyze the data and know what it means to have that moisture content at that depth can help you to understand what the moisture level is like at the surface, which will impact playability, right?
Yeah.
So
Yep.
analyze the data.
And if it's important to know what the moisture level is in the top 1 inch and you decide to put the sensor there, as Jim White has mentioned in the chat here, you definitely want to know where it's located and make good field notes so that when it comes time for aerating, you can flag the sensor location if it is higher than the aeration limit of your, tines.
Absolutely. Very true. And it's, perfect segue that Jim chimed in because, I had the opportunity to participate with him on a sports field testing protocol a couple of years ago, where they utilized some pretty cool equipment. A third-party independent tester came in to evaluate the condition of the field itself. And the thing that impressed me in this process and witnessing the testing that was going on, the moisture content of that field was applicable to every test that they did. One of them being this GMAX or Clegg Hammer testing, where they use a impact soil tester to determine the hardness of the playing surface, right? And it's based primarily on concussion protocol, so that when a tackle is made or if a player hits the playing surface with their head, what's the risk of head injury associated with that, right? So
right.
It needs to be within a certain range of softness in order to pass and fall within those regulations and requirements. So they took this machine around to different points on the soccer pitch and did this impact test to make sure that it was within the range required in order to reduce the risk of injury and concussion. So that's something that's very scientific. It was automated mechanical device, and this is the kind of stuff that comes into play when considering that. Mm-hmm. Another test that they performed was the bounce and roll test for the soccer ball. Again, depending on the hardness or the firmness of that playing surface, had to have a certain amount of bounce, and it had to have a certain amount of roll associated with it. And again, it all had to do with how much moisture was in that playing surface, and they took very specific measurements to make sure it was within the parameters.
Right. Did you take that video, Chris?
I did.
And what is the gentleman on the left after the ball rolls down? Is he measuring something, or what is he doing?
There's a sight glass, so he's measuring how far the roll was.
Oh,
right. So it's kind of similar in golf when they're measuring the speed of greens using a stint meter, right? They'll roll a ball down a grade and measure how far it rolls, and that distance is totally dependent on the firmness of that playing surface, right? So, and then they would drop the ball from a height and measure the bounce, and in soccer that's very important. It's also in baseball. The outfield, the turf has to have a certain amount of bounce to it so that the hits into the outfield are playable for the athletes, right? So having the proper moisture content in those playing surfaces is critical in order to enhance the sport itself. Okay. Another consideration in baseball is the infields and the clay, or what they call the skins, and making sure that there's proper moisture content in that surface as well, right? And last week, Greg and Dan spoke about the coach's button and how that can be used to wet down the infield of a ball diamond for dust control, and also for looks of the clay. But in more depth, it's important to know what the moisture content is, at certain depths within that clay surface, because if it dries out, it's very hard to rehydrate, and they have to make sure that there's enough moisture at a lower level in that clay track that can then wick to the surface during the day or during the game, and to ensure that there is still an adequate amount of moisture at the surface level during that time period. So there's more and more interest in utilizing moisture sensors at various depths in that clay to measure how moist it is, at 1 foot depth, as well as how much moisture there is in the first couple of inches, to maintain that playability. So again, using our technology in a different kind of format than typical landscape irrigation, you can monitor how much moisture is in that clay and create those start-stop pause conditions that can help you manage it better.
Yeah, and it can take moisture a long time to penetrate and move through clay surfaces like that. So that's important as a reminder, as you just said. And then, what's fascinating about looking at moisture graphs is seeing moisture rise through the soil. So for those of you that may be unfamiliar with looking at moisture graphs online, is you can actually see the water move up in the profile throughout the day. If there's no artificial water being applied, there can be a rise in moisture in an upwards fashion, which is pretty interesting.
Absolutely, for sure. Okay, so as we talk about how to manage this moisture content, and using the baseline control system to assist it or automate that process, it comes back to what we talked about on a previous episode with the upper limit watering strategy using the soil moisture sensor technology, right? So explain to the listeners again what an upper limit strategy means when watering with baseline soil moisture sensors.
Yeah, so we'll describe it in a few ways. So the few terms are upper limit, upper threshold, watering to field capacity, watering to wet, watering to full. All of those things kind of mean the same, which is watering to, to that, for lack of a better word, that upper limit, which is where you'd want to stop your watering. And when you do that, that is controlling the run time. So what's important to remember about upper limit watering is that the run times may vary. If your soil profile happens to be nearly full, you may only need a little bit of water to top it off. If it's been 5 or 6 days, or even just 3 days without watering and it's depleted, you may need more runtime to fill the profile up. And so when you use an upper limit watering strategy, you have different run times, right? Different run times, but you have more of a fixed schedule. I want to water on Mondays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. When you water on those days, the run time may change because you're just simply watering up to full and then stopping.
Yep. And full doesn't always have to mean that it's at field capacity. Full
it can be user-defined full.
Limit,
that's right.
That limit that you want in order to maintain that playability of that.
So if you're
surface.
thinking about that compaction test, I don't know what the moisture readings were, but there should be some correlation to this firmness with X moisture. So if you knew the moisture value, then you could maintain said firmness just by monitoring the moisture level.
For sure, right? And so when we're watering to that, it's important to utilize the cycle and soak feature, right? And allow each cycle to, percolate into that soil profile to determine if we are getting to that upper limit setting that we've put into the control system to stop irrigating.
That's right. So we have to water and then
playability.
wait for it to reach the sensor. Water
Yep.
and then wait for it to reach the sensor.
Yep, exactly. So depending on how often you're able to water, either based on watering restriction, if you're a municipality and you can only water your sports fields on certain days of the week, or if because of a playing schedule, you're only able to water on certain days of the week, you want to make sure that when given those opportunities to water, that you program the controller so that it can water long enough in order to get up to your upper limit. Okay. So when we discussed the strategy last time, we talked about, setting a runtime that would allow perhaps up to an inch of water to be applied. Doesn't mean that we're going to apply all that water. It just means that we're going to create enough cycle and soak scenarios during that runtime operation so that the controller and the sensor will see when that upper limit is achieved and then stop irrigating, so that when you water the next time, it's not applying more water in order to try to find that upper limit setting.
It's kind of like, as you sometimes say, Chris, watering outside the start time. Upper limit would be potentially watering outside the runtime, because the controller's not looking at total runtime of 60 minutes and applying 60 minutes. It's seeing, I have 4 cycles. I'm going to start a cycle, and a cycle maybe is 15 minutes. So it just runs a cycle. Then it waits. If there's enough moisture, that's enough. If it's not enough moisture, it applies another cycle. And it keeps doing that until we reach that limit, and then it stops.
Correct. Yeah. So, this is probably one of the most misunderstood functions of watering with soil moisture sensors, in my experience, in being able to, let go of your preconceived notions that, I can't put in a 60-minute runtime for that zone, and then break it up into cycles because I can't water 60 minutes. That's not what we're saying, right? Just give it the opportunity to have a long enough runtime broken up into those cycles so that it gives the chance for that upper limit to be met during that irrigation cycle.
Yep. And if somebody left the controller off for a week and then they turned it back on, it might need all of that runtime potentially, because it got very depleted.
Yep, for sure. And if that is the case, if you're really limited on when you can water, you have to take into consideration your water window and your design flow. And then you may have to prioritize those sports fields over the outlying areas to make sure that they maintain their playability, right? So hopefully, talking through that process again just reinforces in the mind of our listeners to learn how to use that upper limit strategy for success in managing sports turf.
And the cycle and soak. If there is no cycle and soak set, it'll always run for whatever time that you put on it, because the controller can't stop a cycle once it's in motion. Once the cycle started, it's going. So you need to set your cycles and soaks.
Yep, for sure. All right, very cool. So we've had a couple of questions that come in, or comments. Let's see. One question was, how is grass height calculated into rollout? I guess it's referencing that roll test. Obviously, there's going to be an impact. The pitch has to be mowed to a certain specification of length and then wetted to create that role requirement. It's also
Yeah.
interesting to think about, the speed also of the ball, right? If you go to a soccer game, an MLS game, for instance, right before play at the beginning of the game and then again at half, they'll turn the sprinklers on and wet down the field. And certain teams, I've learned, have their own specification for how wet the pitch is during the game to create a home field advantage based on the speed of the ball and how it rolls. So
yeah,
lots of different ways you can use, coach's button or manual operation and mobile access to turn on for a wet down during game and during playtime as well. So
yeah. And that's actually a great moment to point out that we're talking about, real turf grass here, not artificial, but we do see, and we are involved with a lot of artificial turf fields that utilize baseline and utilize the coach's button for that exact purpose. So the coach doesn't need to know how to operate the control system. They just know there's the button. When I push that button, I get a soak down cycle on my bid guns around this field hockey field to meet not only the specification, of that field, but for that playability. And that's what they need to know. I push this button, I get my syringe cycle.
Yep, for sure. So some good talking points and interesting considerations. And we've got, participants with us today that come from, those different types of sports turf management that we mentioned, right?
Yep.
With the municipalities, it's a big deal. We're watering the landscape, for the park, but we're also watering the park for the sports turf,
yep.
right? And they get a lot of play and a lot of abuse through the peak season, and it's often very difficult to irrigate them correctly.
Yeah, so, and we've had, I'll mention we've had a few situations where the same water source and the same control system manages both the athletic fields and the surrounding just landscaped areas. And we're able to utilize the program priorities so that if a coach wants water and they activate their coach's button, that it can pause any landscape operation that might be happening. It pauses it in real time, waters down the athletic field. When the athletic field's done, it automatically goes back and starts watering the landscape again, because it just simply paused that program, ran the program of a higher priority, and then resumed watering the landscape.
Yep. And oftentimes if these sports fields have lights with them, they'll, be playing on those surfaces, well after normal start time for the landscape irrigation. So again, you can set those individual water windows for those programs, those priorities, so that you're not, initiating irrigation cycles when there's still play on those fields. So
yeah,
we encourage you to, learn more about it and talk to your, baseline regional manager and discuss some of these strategies and different ways that the technology could be applied to program around this. So
yep.
We're at the bottom of our hour, Mr. Humphrey. Again, a lot of information in a short amount of time, but we appreciate you dialing in and participating. Always great to see you. And we'll be back in a couple more weeks with another live session.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. And if you haven't experimented with upper limit watering, give it a try yourself. Find a client to learn from. Look at the data remotely. It's amazing what you can see when you put some of this into action.
Definitely. All right. Very good. Go out, work hard, be safe, and happy irrigating. We will talk to you again next time when we're live on Tech Talk Tuesday.
Yep. See you, everyone.
Bye.